The moment Garrett Fletcher heard the soft breathing coming from his hay wagon, he knew his solitary life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. It was late September in 1878, and the New Mexico Territory sun was just beginning to paint the horizon in shades of amber and rose. As Garrett made his way to his wagon, parked behind the small barn on his ranch outside Lordsburg. He had spent the last 3 days driving cattle to market and was bone tired, looking forward to nothing more than a hot meal and his own bed. But as he approached the wagon to unload the remaining supplies, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of someone sleeping in his hay. Garrett's hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip, but he did not draw it. Years of living alone on the frontier had taught him caution, but something about the gentle rhythm of that breathing made him pause. He moved quietly to the back of the wagon and pulled aside the canvas covering. There, nestled in the hay like a bird in a nest, was a young woman. Her dark hair was tangled with bits of straw, and her face was smudged with dirt and what looked like dried tears. She wore a simple calico dress that had seen better days, torn at the hem and stained with travel. Even in sleep, her brow was furrowed with worry, and her hands clutched a small bundle to her chest. Garrett stood there for a long moment, unsure what to do. He was a man of 32 years who had lived alone since his parents died of fever 6 years ago. Women were a mystery to him, frightened creatures who passed through his life as quickly as tumbleweeds in a dust storm. But this woman, sleeping so vulnerably in his wagon, stirred something in his chest that he had long thought dead. "Miss," he said quietly, not wanting to startle her too badly. "Miss, you need to wake up." The woman's eyes flew open, and Garrett found himself staring into the most striking green eyes he had ever seen. For a moment they simply looked at each other, and then panic flooded her features. She scrambled backward in the hay, clutching her bundle tighter. "Please," she gasped, "please do not hurt me. I can explain everything." Garrett held up his hands, showing her he meant no harm. "I am not going to hurt you, miss, but you are sleeping in my wagon, and I think I deserve to know why." The woman's chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. But there was nowhere to go, and slowly, she seemed to realize this. Her shoulders sagged, and fresh tears began to stream down her face. "My name is Grace Winters," she said, her voice trembling. "I ran away from my husband 3 days ago. He was going to kill me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and terrible. Garrett felt his jaw tighten. He had heard stories like this before, of men who treated their wives worse than animals, but he had never come face to face with one of the victims. "What is in the bundle?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Grace looked down at what she was holding and slowly unwrapped it. Inside was a small leather pouch and what looked like a few pieces of dried meat and bread. "Everything I own in this world," she said quietly. "I took what little money I had saved in secret and some food from the kitchen. I knew if I stayed another day, I would not live to see another week." Garrett climbed into the wagon, moving slowly so as not to frighten her. He sat down on the opposite side, leaving plenty of space between them. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning." Grace's story came out in fits and starts, interrupted by tears and long silences. She had married a man named Raymond Dalton 2 years ago in Santa Fe. At first, he had seemed kind enough, a successful merchant who had swept her off her feet with promises of a good life. But the kindness had been a mask. Once they were married, Raymond had shown his true nature, controlling, jealous, and increasingly violent. He would fly into rages over nothing, Grace said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If dinner was not ready exactly when he wanted it, or if I spoke to another man, even just the grocer. He started hitting me about 6 months after we were married. At first, it was just slaps, but it got worse. Much worse. She pulled back the sleeve of her dress, revealing a series of bruises in various stages of healing, from fresh purple to sickly yellow-green. Garrett felt anger rise in his throat like bile. A week ago, he came home drunk and told me he had lost a lot of money gambling. He blamed me somehow, said I had cursed him with my presence. He beat me so badly I could not get out of bed for 2 days. When I could finally move again, I heard him talking to his brother. They were planning something about insurance money. It took me a while to understand, but then I realized. Raymond had taken out a life insurance policy on me. He was planning to kill me and make it look like an accident. "Did you go to the law?" Garrett asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Grace laughed bitterly. "The sheriff in Santa Fe is Raymond's cousin. When I tried to tell him about the beatings months ago, he told me it was not his business what happened between a man and his wife. He said I should try harder to be a better wife." Garrett shook his head in disgust. He knew the world was often unkind to women, but hearing it laid out so plainly made his blood boil. "So you ran?" "I ran," Grace confirmed. "I waited until Raymond left the house to meet with some business associates. I took what little I could carry and I just started walking. I had no plan, nowhere to go. I just knew I had to get away. I walked for hours until I reached the edge of town, and then I saw a freight wagon heading south. I managed to convince the driver to let me ride with him in exchange for the few coins I had. He dropped me off in Deeming, but I was too afraid to stay in town. Raymond would be looking for me by then, and I knew he would check all the nearby settlements." "So you kept moving," Garrett said. "I kept moving. I walked along the road, hiding when I heard horses or wagons approaching. I slept in ditches and behind rocks. Yesterday, I saw your wagon parked outside a ranch house while you were inside conducting business. I was so tired, so desperately tired. I thought I would just rest for a moment while you were occupied, but I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, we were moving. I was too frightened to reveal myself, afraid you might be angry and turn me over to the authorities. So I stayed hidden in the hay, and I guess I fell asleep again." Garrett was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had told him. His life had been simple and predictable, just the way he liked it. He worked his small ranch, raised cattle, and kept to himself. He had no interest in complications, no desire for entanglements. But as he looked at Grace, at the fear and exhaustion etched into her young face, he knew he could not simply turn her away. "How old are you?" he asked. 23, she replied. "I know I must look older with all this dirt and these bruises, but I am only 23. Garrett nodded. She was young, too young to have suffered so much. "Well, Grace Winters, here is what we are going to do. You are going to come into my house, get cleaned up, and have a proper meal. Then we are going to figure out how to keep you safe." Grace's eyes widened. "You would do that for me?" "But you do not even know me." "I know enough," Garrett said firmly. "I know you are running for your life from a man who means to do you harm. I know you are brave enough to have made it this far on your own. And I know that I could not live with myself if I turned you away and something happened to you." Fresh tears spilled down Grace's cheeks, but this time they were tears of relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Garrett helped her down from the wagon, noting how she winced when she put weight on her left foot. "Are you injured?" "Just blisters from all the walking," she said. "I will be fine." But Garrett could see she was far from fine. She was exhausted, malnourished, and clearly in pain. He offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Together, they walked toward the small ranch house that Garrett called home. The house was modest but well-maintained, a simple 2-room structure with a kitchen and living area in one room and a bedroom in the other. Garrett had built most of it himself with help from neighbors, and while it was not much to look at, it was sturdy and kept out the worst of the weather. Grace looked around with wide eyes as they entered. "You live here alone?" "I do," Garrett confirmed. "My parents built this place 20 years ago when they first came to the territory. After they died, I kept it going. It is not fancy, but it is home." "It is wonderful," Grace said softly, and Garrett could hear the longing in her voice. He wondered when she had last felt safe, last felt like she had a home. He directed her to sit in one of the wooden chairs near the fireplace while he set about heating water for a bath. As he worked, building up the fire and filling the large copper tub he kept in the corner, Grace watched him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked finally. "You do not know me. I could be lying about everything." Garrett paused in his work and looked at her. "Are you lying?" "No," she said firmly. "I swear on my mother's grave everything I told you is the truth." "Then that is all I need to know," Garrett said. "Besides, I may be many things, but I am not the kind of man who turns away someone in need. My mother would rise from her grave and box my ears if I did." A small smile tugged at the corners of Grace's mouth, the first real expression of happiness Garrett had seen on her face. It transformed her features, making her look younger and softer. He felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he had not experienced in a very long time. Once the water was hot enough, Garrett poured it into the tub and then excused himself to give Grace privacy. "I will be right outside," he said. "Take your time. There is soap by the tub, and I will leave some clean clothes for you. They will be too big, but they will be better than what you have on now." He stepped outside into the gathering darkness and leaned against the wall of his house, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air. What had he gotten himself into? He knew nothing about this woman except that she was running from a violent husband. But something about her had touched him, had awakened a protective instinct he did not know he possessed. After about half an hour, Grace called out that she was finished. Garrett went back inside to find her dressed in one of his old shirts and a pair of trousers she had rolled up several times to keep from tripping. Her hair was still damp and hung in dark waves around her face, and without the dirt and grime, he could see that she was beautiful. Not in the flashy way of saloon girls, but in a quiet, natural way that made him catch his breath. "Much better," he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Now let us get some food in you." He prepared a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread, along with hot coffee. Grace ate like she had not seen food in days, which Garrett suspected was close to the truth. He watched her eat, noting the way her hands shook slightly as she lifted the spoon to her mouth, the way her eyes kept darting to the door as if she expected Raymond to burst through at any moment. "You are safe here," he said quietly. "I promise you that." Grace looked at him with those green eyes, and he saw hope warring with fear. "How can you promise that? Raymond has connections. He will look for me. And when he finds me, he will kill me, and he will probably kill you too for helping me." "Let him try," Garrett said, and there was steel in his voice. "This is my land, and I protect what is mine. Besides, Raymond does not know you are here. As far as anyone knows, you could be anywhere between Santa Fe and Mexico." "But someone might have seen me climbing into your wagon," Grace protested, "or I might have been seen along the road." "Then we will deal with that if it happens," Garrett said firmly. "But right now, the most important thing is that you are safe, fed, and have a place to rest. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." Grace nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. They finished their meal in companionable silence, and then Garrett insisted she take his bed while he would sleep on a bedroll by the fire. "I cannot take your bed," Grace protested. "You have already done so much for me." "You can and you will," Garrett said. "You need proper rest, and that bed is more comfortable than the floor. I have slept on worse many times." Too tired to argue further, Grace agreed. As she disappeared into the bedroom, Garrett began to clean up from dinner, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. He had taken on a huge responsibility by agreeing to help Grace, and he knew that life as he knew it was over. But strangely, he did not feel the panic he expected. Instead, he felt something he had not felt in a long time: purpose. That night, as Garrett lay on his bedroll listening to the crackling fire, he heard soft crying coming from the bedroom. He wanted to go to Grace, to comfort her somehow, but he knew it would be inappropriate. So he simply lay there in the darkness, silently vowing to do whatever it took to keep her safe. The next morning, Garrett woke before dawn, as was his habit. He was surprised to find Grace already up, standing by the window and looking out at the pre-dawn landscape. She had put her own dress back on, having washed it as best she could the night before. "Could not sleep?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her. Grace turned to face him, and he could see the dark circles under her eyes. "I kept having nightmares," she admitted. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Raymond's face." Garrett nodded, understanding. "It will take time," he said, "but the nightmares will fade eventually." "Will they?" Grace asked, and there was such raw vulnerability in her voice that it made Garrett's heart ache. "They will," he said with more confidence than he felt. "I promise." He made breakfast simple fare of eggs from his chickens and more cornbread from the night before. As they ate, Garrett outlined his plan. "I have been thinking about your situation," he said. "Raymond will be looking for you, that much is certain. But he does not know you are here, and there is no reason for him to come to Lordsburg looking. This is a small town, and most people here mind their own business. If anyone asks, we will say you are my cousin from back east, come to help me run the ranch." Grace frowned. "But someone might find out the truth. What if Raymond sends men out to look for me?" "That is a risk," Garrett admitted, "but I think it is a small one. Men like Raymond typically do not put much effort into finding a runaway wife unless it affects their reputation or pocketbook. You said yourself, he was planning to kill you for the insurance money. If you are gone, he cannot claim that money anyway. He might search for a while out of pride and anger, but eventually he will give up and move on." "You do not know Raymond," Grace said, her voice tight with fear. "He does not give up. He does not forget. If he thinks I have made him look foolish by running away, he will search for me until his dying day." Garrett reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. It was the first time he had deliberately touched her, and he felt a jolt of something electric pass between them. Grace's eyes widened, but she did not pull away. "Then we will be ready for him," Garrett said firmly. "But Grace, you cannot live your entire life in fear. At some point you have to decide to live again, to take back the life he stole from you." Tears welled up in Grace's eyes, but she nodded. "You are right. I know you are right. It is just so hard to believe that I could ever be free of him." "You are free of him," Garrett said. "You freed yourself the moment you walked out that door. Now you just have to stay free." Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Garrett went about his daily work on the ranch, tending to his cattle and horses, repairing fences, and doing all the countless tasks that kept a ranch running. Grace helped where she could, cooking meals, tending the vegetable garden, and mending clothes. She was clearly not used to such physical labor, her hands soft from a life of relative ease, but she did not complain. Instead, she threw herself into the work with a determination that Garrett admired. As they worked side by side, they talked. Garrett learned about Grace's childhood in St. Louis, where her father had been a banker and her mother a schoolteacher. She had been raised with education and refinement, taught to be a proper lady. When her parents died in a cholera outbreak, she had been taken in by an aunt who was not particularly kind. Meeting Raymond had seemed like a blessing at the time, an escape from an unhappy situation. She realized too late that she had traded one prison for another. Garrett told her about his own childhood, growing up on this very ranch, learning the ways of cattle and horses from his father. His mother had been a gentlewoman who had taught him to read and write, instilling in him a love of learning that was rare in these parts. Their deaths from fever had left him alone at 26, and he had been managing the ranch by himself ever since. "Have you never wanted to marry?" Grace asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the distant mountains. Garrett was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I thought about it once," he admitted. "There was a girl in town, Sarah Miller. She was pretty and seemed kind. But when I approached her father about courting her, he made it clear that I was not good enough. I did not have enough land, enough money, enough prospects. After that, I decided that maybe the solitary life was better. At least you cannot be disappointed if you do not expect anything." "That is a lonely way to live," Grace said softly. "It is," Garrett agreed. "But it is also safe. You cannot get hurt if you do not let anyone close enough to hurt you." Grace was quiet for a moment, then said, "I understand that. After Raymond, I thought I would never trust another man again. But you have been nothing but kind to me, Garrett. You have shown me that not all men are like him." Garrett felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I am glad I could do that," he said. "You deserve to know that kindness exists in this world." As the days turned into weeks, something began to shift between them. The initial awkwardness faded, replaced by an easy companionship that felt natural and right. Garrett found himself looking forward to coming back to the house each evening, knowing Grace would be there with a hot meal and a warm smile. Grace, for her part, seemed to slowly shed the fear that had clung to her like a second skin, laughing more easily and moving with less tension in her shoulders. One afternoon, about a month after Grace's arrival, Garrett was working on fixing a broken section of fence when he looked up to see a rider approaching. His hand instinctively moved to his rifle, but he relaxed when he recognized the visitor as Tom Riley, a neighboring rancher and one of the few people Garrett considered a friend. "Afternoon, Garrett," Tom called out as he rode up. "Heard you have a visitor staying with you." Garrett kept his expression neutral. News travels fast. Tom dismounted and tied his horse to the fence post. "You know how it is in small towns. Nothing stays secret for long. Martha saw a woman hanging laundry behind your house last week and came straight home to tell me about it. I told her she was probably mistaken, but she insisted. So, who is she?" Garrett had been expecting this conversation and had prepared for it. "My cousin Grace. She came from back east to help me run the place. Gets lonely out here by myself." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Cousin, huh? You never mentioned having any family left." "It is a distant relation," Garrett said, meeting Tom's gaze steadily. "My mother's side. We have not been close, but when Grace found herself in need of a fresh start, I offered her a place here." Tom studied him for a long moment, and Garrett could see the wheels turning in his mind. Tom Riley was not a stupid man, and he clearly suspected there was more to the story. But he was also a decent man who respected privacy. "Well," Tom said finally, "it is good you have help. Running a ranch alone is hard work. If you need anything, you let me and Martha know. We are always happy to help neighbors." "I appreciate that, Tom," Garrett said, and he meant it. After Tom left, Garrett went back to the house to find Grace pale and trembling. "I heard voices," she said. "Was someone here?" "Just a neighbor," Garrett assured her. "I told him you were my cousin. He seemed to accept it." Grace bit her lip. "Do you think he believed you?" "I think he chose to believe me," Garrett said. "There is a difference, but Tom is a good man. Even if he suspects the truth, he will not cause problems for us." Despite Garrett's reassurances, The visit from Tom Riley had shaken Grace. That night, she barely touched her dinner and Garrett could see the fear creeping back into her eyes. "Talk to me," he said finally. "What are you thinking?" Grace looked up at him, and he could see tears threatening to spill over. "I am thinking that I have put you in an impossible position. People are starting to notice me, starting to ask questions. What happens when Raymond hears that a woman matching my description is living with a cowboy outside Lordsburg? He will come here, Garrett, and when he does, people will get hurt." "Then let him come," Garrett said, his voice hard. "I am not afraid of Raymond Dalton." "Maybe you should be," Grace said. "He is dangerous, Garrett. He has money and connections. He could make your life very difficult." "He could try," Garrett agreed. "But this is my land and I have rights too. If he comes here making threats, the law will have to take my side." Grace laughed bitterly. "The law? The law has never been on my side, Garrett. Why would it start now?" Garrett reached across the table and took both of her hands in his. "Because you are not alone anymore, Grace. You have me and I will fight for you. With everything I have, I will fight for you." Grace looked at him with such intensity that Garrett felt his breath catch. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" The honest answer rose to Garrett's lips before he could stop it. "Because somewhere along the way I started to care about you, more than I probably should." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Grace's eyes widened, and for a moment Garrett thought he had made a terrible mistake. But then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. "I have started to care about you too," she admitted. "I did not think I could ever feel this way about anyone again, but you have been so kind, so patient with me. You make me feel safe in a way I have not felt in years." Garrett felt his heart soar. He stood up from his chair and moved around the table, kneeling beside Grace so they were at eye level. "I know the circumstances are not ideal," he said. "I know you are still legally married and running from a dangerous man, but I want you to know that whatever happens, I am here for you. Not out of obligation, but because I want to be." Grace reached out and cupped his face in her hands, her touch gentle and warm. "You are a good man, Garrett Fletcher, the best man I have ever known." They stayed like that for a long moment, looking into each other's eyes, and Garrett felt a connection forming between them that went deeper than words. When Grace finally leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The kiss was gentle and sweet, tinged with the sadness of all they had both been through, but also full of hope for what might be. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily, and Garrett could see the flush on Grace's cheeks. "I am sorry," she said quickly. "I should not have done that. You must think I am terrible, kissing you when I am still married to another man." "I think nothing of the sort," Garrett said firmly. "That marriage was a sham, forced on you by circumstances and maintained through violence. As far as I am concerned, you owe Raymond Dalton nothing, least of all fidelity." Grace smiled through her tears. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I think I am the lucky one," Garrett said. "Finding you sleeping in my hay wagon was the best thing that ever happened to me." From that night on, things changed between them. The attraction that had been building for weeks was finally acknowledged, and while they both knew they had to be careful, they allowed themselves to grow closer. Garrett would hold Grace's hand as they sat on the porch in the evenings, and she would lean against his shoulder, feeling safe and protected. They stole kisses in the barn and while working in the garden, sweet moments of affection that felt precious, because they had both gone so long without tenderness. But their happiness was tempered by the constant awareness that danger could arrive at any moment. Garrett began to keep his rifle closer, and he taught Grace how to shoot, just in case. She was a natural, her hand steady and her eye sharp. Garrett suspected that her refined upbringing had included some education in firearms, and Grace confirmed that her father had insisted she know how to protect herself. Winter arrived early that year, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Garrett was grateful for the harsh weather, knowing it would make travel difficult and thus reduce the chances of Raymond tracking Grace down. He and Grace spent the long winter evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's minds and hearts. It was during one of these evenings, with snow falling softly outside and the fire crackling warmly in the hearth, that Grace told Garrett something that changed everything. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice serious. "Something I have not told you before." Garrett felt a flutter of worry. "What is it?" Grace took a deep breath. "Before I left Santa Fe, I went to see a lawyer, not one of Raymond's friends, but a man my father once knew. I told him everything about the abuse, about Raymond's plan to kill me. He said that under New Mexico territorial law, I might be able to get a divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty. It would be difficult, and I would need evidence, but it is possible." Garrett sat up straighter. "That is wonderful news. Why did you not tell me this before?" "Because I was afraid," Grace admitted. "Afraid that if I tried to get a divorce, it would alert Raymond to where I was. The lawyer said I would need witnesses, people who had seen the abuse or knew about it. But everyone I knew in Santa Fe was loyal to Raymond or too scared to speak against him." "But now," Garrett prompted. "But now I have been thinking," Grace continued. "There was a woman, Maria Santos, who worked as a maid in Raymond's house. She saw everything, heard everything. If I could find her and convince her to testify, I might have a chance. And there was a Dr. Harrison, who treated me several times for injuries Raymond caused. He always knew the truth, even though I lied about how I got hurt. He might be willing to help." Garrett's mind was racing. "So what are you saying?" Grace turned to face him fully. "I am saying that maybe it is time to stop running and start fighting back. I am tired of being afraid, Garrett. I want my life back. I want to be free of Raymond legally, not just physically. And if there is even a small chance I can get a divorce, I want to take it." Garrett reached out and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Then we will make it happen," he said. "Whatever it takes, we will get you free." "It will be dangerous," Grace warned. "We would have to go back to Santa Fe or at least send word there. Raymond would find out." "Let him find out," Garrett said. "If you are pursuing a legal divorce, he cannot simply kill you without facing serious consequences. The law might not have helped you before, but if you bring formal charges and have witnesses, they will have to pay attention." Grace pulled back to look at him. "You would come with me to Santa Fe?" "Of course," Garrett said. "I told you I am with you in this. Whatever happens, we face it together." For the first time since Garrett had met her, Grace looked truly hopeful. "Do you really think it could work?" "I think it is worth trying," Garrett said. "But we need to plan this carefully. We cannot just rush in without preparation." Over the next few weeks, they formulated a plan. Garrett made discreet inquiries about lawyers in Santa Fe who might be willing to take on a case like Grace's. He also reached out to a friend who worked for the territorial marshal, explaining the situation and asking for advice. The friend warned that divorces were difficult to obtain and often took years to finalize, but he agreed that if Grace could prove extreme cruelty and had credible witnesses, she stood a chance. Meanwhile, winter gave way to early spring, and the frozen ground began to thaw. Garrett knew that once the weather improved, Raymond's ability to search for Grace would increase. If they were going to make a move, it had to be soon. In early March of 1879, they set out for Santa Fe. Garrett had arranged for Tom Riley to look after his ranch while he was gone, telling him only that he and his cousin had business to attend to in the territorial capital. Tom had given him a knowing look, but had not asked questions. The journey took several days, and Grace grew increasingly nervous as they drew closer to the city. Garrett did his best to reassure her, but he was nervous too. They were walking straight into danger, and there was no guarantee their plan would work. They arrived in Santa Fe on a cool spring morning and immediately went to see the lawyer Grace's father had known, a man named William Thornton. Thornton was in his 60s, with sharp eyes and a reputation for taking on difficult cases. He listened carefully as Grace told her story again, this time with more details and with Garrett there to support her. "This will not be easy," Thornton warned when she had finished. "Your husband is a prominent man in this city, with many friends in high places. But I believe you have a strong case. The key will be finding witnesses willing to testify." Grace told him about Maria Santos and Dr. Harrison. Thornton made notes and promised to begin the process of tracking them down and assessing their willingness to help. "In the meantime," he said, "I will file a petition for divorce on your behalf. This will officially notify your husband of your intentions. I must warn you, once he knows you are pursuing this, he may become dangerous." "He is already dangerous," Grace said. "That is why I am doing this." Thornton nodded approvingly. "You are a brave woman, Mrs. Dalton. I will do everything in my power to help you." As they left Thornton's office, Grace was shaking. Garrett took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You did well," he said. "I am proud of you." "I am terrified," Grace admitted, "but I am also relieved. For the first time in 2 years, I feel like I am taking control of my own life." They had arranged to stay at a small boarding house on the edge of town, hoping to avoid detection as much as possible. But they had only been there one night when there was a loud pounding on their door. Garrett answered it, keeping himself between the door and Grace, his hand on his gun. Standing in the hallway was a man Garrett did not recognize, but from Grace's sharp intake of breath, he knew this must be Raymond Dalton. Raymond was a handsome man in his mid-30s, well-dressed and groomed, with dark hair and cold blue eyes. He looked every inch the successful merchant he claimed to be, but there was something cruel in the set of his mouth, something predatory in his gaze. "Grace," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "I have been so worried about you. Where have you been?" Grace stepped forward, and Garrett was impressed by her courage. "I left you, Raymond. I am not coming back." Raymond's eyes flickered to Garrett, and his expression hardened. "And who is this? Your lover?" "That is none of your business," Grace said firmly. "I came here to divorce you, Raymond." "Mr. Thornton has already filed the papers." For a moment, Raymond's mask of civility slipped, and Garrett saw the rage beneath. But then he smiled, and it was terrifying. "A divorce? On what grounds?" "Extreme cruelty," Grace said. "I have witnesses who will testify to the abuse you subjected me to." Raymond laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think you can divorce me? You think any court will take your word over mine? I am a respected businessman in this city. You are nothing but a runaway wife. No one will believe you." "We will see about that," Grace said, her voice steady despite the fear Garrett could see in her eyes. Raymond took a step forward, and Garrett moved to block him. "I think you should leave," Garrett said quietly, his hand still on his gun. Raymond looked at him with contempt. "And I think you should stay out of business that does not concern you, Cowboy." "Grace concerns me," Garrett said, "which makes this my business." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, and Garrett could feel the tension crackling in the air. Finally, Raymond stepped back. "This is not over," he said, looking at Grace. "You are still my wife, and you will always be my wife. A piece of paper will not change that." "Get out," Grace said, and there was steel in her voice. "Get out, or I will have you arrested for trespassing." Raymond's smile was cruel. We will see each other again soon, my dear. Count on it." He turned and walked away, and Garrett quickly closed and locked the door. Grace collapsed into a chair, shaking violently. "I thought I was ready to face him," she said. But seeing him again, hearing his voice, it brought back everything. Garrett knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "You were amazing," he said. "You stood up to him. You did not back down." "But what if he is right?" Grace asked. "What if no one believes me? What if I can never be free of him?" "Then we will find another way," Garrett promised. "But I do not think it will come to that. Thornton believed you, and he is a smart man. He would not have taken your case if he did not think you could win." Over the next few weeks, Thornton worked diligently on Grace's behalf. He tracked down Maria Santos, who had left Raymond's employ shortly after Grace disappeared. Maria agreed to testify, confirming that she had witnessed Raymond's abuse on multiple occasions. Dr. Harrison was more hesitant, afraid of professional repercussions, but Thornton convinced him that his testimony could save Grace's life. As word of the divorce proceedings spread through Santa Fe's social circles, opinion was divided. Some people supported Grace, admiring her courage in leaving an abusive marriage. Others sided with Raymond, believing that a wife's duty was to stand by her husband no matter what. But enough people were willing to speak out that Thornton felt confident they had a strong case. The divorce hearing was set for early May. As the date approached, Raymond made several more attempts to intimidate Grace, showing up at places he knew she would be, making veiled threats. But with Garrett always by her side and Thornton documenting every instance of harassment, Raymond's tactics only strengthened Grace's case. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed with curious onlookers, eager to witness what had become one of the most talked-about cases in Santa Fe. Grace sat at a table with Thornton, looking pale but determined. Garrett sat directly behind her, offering silent support. Raymond sat across the aisle with his own lawyer, a slick-talking man named Donovan who was known for his aggressive tactics. Throughout the proceedings, Raymond maintained an expression of wounded innocence, playing the part of the wronged husband to perfection. Thornton presented their case methodically and thoroughly. Maria Santos testified about the times she had seen Grace with bruises, about the screaming and crashes she had heard from behind closed doors. Dr. Harrison testified about treating Grace for injuries consistent with physical abuse. Other witnesses came forward, people who had seen Raymond's temper, who had heard him make threatening statements. Donovan tried to discredit each witness, suggesting they were lying or mistaken, that they had ulterior motives. He painted Grace as a promiscuous woman who had abandoned her husband for a cowboy, arguing that she was fabricating abuse to justify her infidelity. When Grace took the stand, Donovan's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned her about her relationship with Garrett, implying that it had begun before she left Raymond. He asked invasive questions about her marriage, trying to make her admit that she had somehow provoked Raymond's violence. But Grace did not break. With quiet dignity, she told her story, describing the beatings, the threats, the terror she had lived with for 2 years. She spoke about overhearing Raymond's plan to kill her for insurance money, about running for her life with nothing but the clothes on her back. When Donovan asked her directly about Garrett, Grace looked straight at the judge and said, "I met Mr. Fletcher after I left my husband. He found me sleeping in his hay wagon and took pity on me. He has been nothing but respectful and honorable. Whatever feelings have developed between us came after I was already separated from Raymond Dalton, and they do not change the facts of the abuse I suffered." The judge listened to everything with an impassive expression. When both sides had finished presenting their cases, He called for a short recess to consider his decision. The wait was agonizing. Grace sat with her hands clenched in her lap, and Garrett wished he could hold her, but he knew the propriety of the situation demanded distance. When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent. "I have heard compelling testimony from both sides in this case," he began. "However, the evidence presented by Mrs. Dalton, corroborated by multiple credible witnesses, convinces me that she has suffered extreme cruelty at the hands of her husband. While divorce is not something this court grants lightly, I believe this is one of those rare cases where it is warranted. I hereby grant Grace Winters Dalton a divorce from Raymond Dalton on the grounds of extreme cruelty. This marriage is dissolved effective immediately." The courtroom erupted in noise. Grace burst into tears, and Thornton patted her shoulder in congratulation. Garrett wanted to rush to her side, but he forced himself to wait until the proper time. Across the aisle, Raymond sat rigid with rage, his face dark with fury. As people began to file out of the courtroom, Raymond pushed his way toward Grace. "This is not over," he hissed. "You think you have won, but you have made a powerful enemy. I will make you regret this." "Mr. Dalton," the judge's voice rang out sharply, "I suggest you leave this courtroom immediately. Any further harassment of the plaintiff will result in contempt charges and possible criminal prosecution." "Do I make myself clear?" Raymond glared at the judge but said nothing. He turned and stormed out, Donovan hurrying after him. Finally, Garrett was able to go to Grace. He did not care what anyone thought anymore. He pulled her into his arms and held her as she cried tears of relief and joy. "It is over," she kept saying. "It is really over." "It is over," Garrett confirmed. "You are free, Grace, truly free." They stayed in Santa Fe for a few more days to finalize the paperwork and make sure there were no legal loose ends. Thornton warned them that Raymond might try to appeal, but he felt confident the divorce would stand. He also suggested they be careful for a while, as men like Raymond sometimes try to take revenge outside the law. "I will not let him hurt you," Garrett told Grace. "I promise you that." On their last night in Santa Fe, Garrett took Grace to a nice restaurant, a proper celebration of her freedom. She wore a new dress she had bought with money Thornton had helped her recover from her father's estate, and Garrett thought she had never looked more beautiful. Over dinner, they talked about the future. "What do you want to do now?" Garrett asked. "Now that you are free to make your own choices." Grace looked at him with those green eyes that had captivated him from the first moment. "I want to go back to Lordsburg with you," she said. "If you will have me." "If I will have you," Garrett repeated, hardly believing what he was hearing. "Grace, there is nothing I want more, but I need you to be sure. You are free now. You could go anywhere, do anything. You do not have to settle for life on a small ranch with a simple cowboy." Grace reached across the table and took his hand. "Garrett Fletcher, you are the least simple person I have ever met. You are kind and brave and honorable. You saved my life, not just by giving me shelter, but by showing me that there was still goodness in the world. I do not want to go anywhere. I want to be with you." Garrett felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I love you, Grace. I have loved you since the moment I found you in my hay wagon, though I did not realize it at the time." "I love you too," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "I never thought I would be able to say those words again, but I do. I love you so much." They left Santa Fe the next morning, both eager to put the city and its memories behind them. The journey back to Lordsburg felt different this time, lighter somehow. Grace rode beside Garrett without fear, her face turned toward the sun, looking more like herself than he had ever seen her. When they arrived back at the ranch, Tom Riley was there to greet them. "Welcome back," he said with a knowing smile. "I trust your business went well." "It did," Garrett confirmed. "Very well indeed." Tom looked at Grace, then back at Garrett. "I am guessing we can stop pretending she is your cousin now," Garrett laughed. "You knew all along, did not you?" "I had my suspicions," Tom admitted, "but it was not my place to say anything. Martha and we just wanted to make sure you were both all right." "We are," Grace said, speaking to Tom directly for the first time. "Better than all right, actually. And I want to thank you for helping Garrett and for not asking too many questions." Tom tipped his hat to her. "Any friend of Garrett's is a friend of ours. You ever need anything, you just let us know." After Tom left, Garrett and Grace stood together on the porch of the ranch house, looking out at the land that was now their home. "So," Garrett said, "what do we do now?" Grace smiled. "Well, I suppose the proper thing would be for you to court me for a respectable amount of time before proposing marriage." "And if I do not want to wait?" Garrett asked. "Then I would say I have already waited long enough for happiness," Grace replied. "I do not see any reason to wait longer." Garrett dropped to one knee right there on the porch. "Grace Winters, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," Grace said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Lordsburg. Tom Riley stood as Garrett's best man, and Martha Riley attended Grace. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding Grace had suffered through with Raymond. This was simple and honest and filled with genuine love. That night, as they lay together for the first time as husband and wife, Grace traced the line of Garrett's jaw with her finger. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not fallen asleep in your hay wagon?" "Every day," Garrett admitted, "but I try not to think about it too much. It scares me to think I might have missed finding you." "I think we were meant to find each other," Grace said. "I think God or fate or whatever you want to call it put me in that wagon at exactly the right moment." "Then I am grateful to God or fate or whatever it was," Garrett said, pulling her closer. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace Fletcher." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Grace replied. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm after that. Grace threw herself into making the ranch house a proper home, planting flowers and herbs, making curtains for the windows, and generally bringing a woman's touch to what had been a bachelor's dwelling. Garrett expanded his cattle operation, and with Grace's help managing the books, they began to turn a modest profit. News reached them eventually that Raymond Dalton had left Santa Fe in disgrace. The scandal of the divorce and the testimony about his abuse had ruined his reputation and his business. He had moved to California, and Garrett and Grace agreed they hoped never to hear from him again. A year after their wedding, Grace discovered she was pregnant. Garrett was beside himself with joy, though he tried not to show it too much, not wanting to pressure Grace. He knew her experience with Raymond might have left her with complicated feelings about motherhood, but Grace seemed genuinely happy. "I never wanted to bring a child into the world when I was married to Raymond," she confided. "But with you, it feels right. It feels like something beautiful instead of something to be feared." Their son was born in the spring of 1881, a healthy boy with Garrett's dark hair and Grace's green eyes. They named him Thomas William Fletcher, after Tom Riley and William Thornton, the two men who had helped them most in their journey to happiness. The birth was difficult, and for a few terrifying hours, Garrett thought he might lose Grace. But she pulled through with the strength and determination he had come to expect from her. When he finally held his wife and son together, he wept openly with joy and relief. As little Thomas grew, the ranch prospered. Garrett hired a few hands to help with the increased workload, and they expanded their operations to include horses as well as cattle. Grace proved to have a natural talent for managing the business side of things, and under her guidance, they began to build real wealth. 2 years after Thomas was born, Grace gave birth to twin girls, named Abigail and Catherine. The house that had once seemed too large for one lonely cowboy was now filled with the noise and chaos of a growing family. Garrett had never been happier. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Garrett and Grace took a rare evening to themselves, sitting on the porch under the stars while the children slept inside. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Garrett asked. "The refinement of St. Louis, the society," Grace laughed softly. "Not even for a moment. This life, right here with you and our children, is everything I ever wanted, more than I ever dreamed possible during those dark days with Raymond." "I still cannot believe sometimes that you are really mine," Garrett said. "That you chose me. You chose me first," Grace reminded him. "You chose to help me when you could have turned me away. You chose to fight for me when it would have been easier to let me go. Every choice you made showed me what real love looks like." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and watching the stars. Finally, Grace said, "Do you remember what you said to me that first night, when I told you why I was running?" "I remember," Garrett said. "I said I would fight for you with everything I had." "You kept that promise," Grace said. "And now I want to make you a promise. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to build this life with you, to raise our children with you, to grow old with you. You saved me, Garrett, but more than that, you showed me how to save myself. You gave me back my life." Garrett pulled her close, kissing her with all the love and passion he felt. "You saved me too," he said. "I was so lonely before you came along. I did not even realize how lonely until you filled that emptiness with your presence. You make me whole, Grace." The years passed peacefully after that. Thomas grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. The twins were bright and spirited, keeping both their parents on their toes. In 1885, Grace gave birth to one more child, another boy they named Samuel. Raymond Dalton never troubled them again. They heard years later that he had died in a bar fight in San Francisco. And while neither Grace nor Garrett wished ill on anyone, they could not help but feel relieved that that chapter of their lives was truly closed forever. As their children grew and started families of their own, Garrett and Grace remained as devoted to each other as they had been from the beginning. They grew old together on the ranch, watching their grandchildren play in the same fields where they had built their life together. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a big celebration. The ranch house was filled with family and friends, all gathered to honor the love story that had begun so improbably in a hay wagon so many years ago. That night, after everyone had gone home, Garrett and Grace sat once again on their porch, older now but no less in love. 30 years, Garrett marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you in my wagon, and sometimes it feels like you have always been here." "I have always been here," Grace said. "From the moment you decided to help me instead of turning me away, my heart belonged to you. It just took us a little while to figure it out." They sat together watching the sunset, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The lonely cowboy and the frightened woman in his hay wagon were gone, replaced by a couple who had weathered storms and emerged stronger for it. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Garrett pulled Grace close. "I love you, Mrs. Fletcher." "And I love you, Mr. Fletcher," Grace replied. "Always and forever." Their love story had begun with fear and uncertainty, but it had grown into something solid and enduring. From that first moment, when Garrett had heard soft breathing coming from his hay wagon and made the choice to help rather than turn away, their fates had been intertwined. They had fought for each other, believed in each other, and built a life filled with love and family. The ranch that had once been home to one lonely cowboy was now a thriving homestead, filled with the laughter of children and grandchildren. And at the center of it all was the love between Garrett and Grace, a love that had conquered fear, overcome obstacles, and stood the test of time. As they rose to go inside for the night, Garrett took one last look at his hay wagon, still stored in the barn after all these years. He had never gotten rid of it, always keeping it as a reminder of how drastically life could change in a single moment. That wagon had brought Grace into his life, and with her had come everything he held dear. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked, following his gaze. "Just remembering," Garrett said with a smile. "Remembering the day everything changed." Grace squeezed his hand. "The best day of both our lives." "The best day of both our lives," Garrett agreed. They walked into the house together, closing the door behind them on another perfect day in a life full of them. Outside, the New Mexico stars shone bright over the ranch, silent witnesses to a love story that had begun in fear and blossomed into something beautiful and eternal. The lonely cowboy had found his home in the woman sleeping in his hay wagon, and she had found her salvation in him. Together, they had built not just a life, but a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. And as they lay down to sleep that night, wrapped in each other's arms just as they had been for 30 years, both knew that every challenge had been worth it, every fear overcome, because it had led them to this moment, to this life, to each other. Their story was proof that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unexpected ways, and that true love, once found, can overcome any obstacle. From a frightened woman hiding in hay to a confident matriarch surrounded by family, from a lonely cowboy to a devoted husband and father, they had transformed not just their own lives, but created a legacy that would last far beyond their years. As Grace drifted off to sleep, she thought back to that terrifying night when she had climbed into a stranger's wagon, desperate and alone. She had been running from death and had found life instead. She had been seeking escape and had found home. And most importantly, she had been convinced she would never trust or love again, and instead had found a love so deep and true that it had healed all her wounds and given her a future she had never dared to dream of. Garrett lay awake a while longer, listening to his wife's steady breathing and thinking about the journey they had taken together. He had been content with his solitary existence, or so he had thought. But Grace had shown him that contentment was not the same as happiness, and that opening his heart to another person, risking the vulnerability that came with love, was the bravest and most rewarding thing he had ever done. Their children and grandchildren would tell their story for years to come. The romantic tale of how Grandma Grace had come to Grandpa Garrett in a hay wagon, and how he had protected her and loved her and given her a new life. It would become family legend, embellished perhaps with each retelling, but always true in its essentials. That love could be found in the darkest moments, that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected places. As the night deepened and the ranch settled into quiet, Garrett finally allowed himself to sleep, secure in the knowledge that he would wake up next to the woman he loved, just as he had every morning for 30 years, and would for whatever years remained to them. Their love story, which had begun with such uncertainty and fear, had become the foundation upon which an entire family was built. And somewhere in the barn, that old hay wagon sat in the darkness, a silent witness to where it all began, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary objects can become part of the most extraordinary stories. For it was in that wagon, on that September night in 1878, that lonely cowboy Garrett Fletcher found sleeping woman Grace Winters, and in doing so, found the other half of his soul. The end of their beginning had led to the beginning of everything else. A marriage built on mutual respect and deep love, children raised with kindness and strength, a ranch that prospered under their joint care, and a partnership that proved that two broken people could come together and create something whole and beautiful. Years later, when Garrett passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Grace held his hand and whispered her gratitude for every moment they had shared. She lived 3 more years, surrounded by the family they had built together, before joining him. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their matching headstones simple but meaningful, bearing their names, their years, and one simple phrase that told their entire story. 2 hearts, 1 love forever. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from Thomas to his children and their children after them. The old hay wagon was eventually restored and placed in a place of honor, a family heirloom that represented not just their history, but the power of compassion, courage, and love. And so the story of the lonely cowboy who found a woman sleeping in his hay wagon, and what she told him that made everything clear, became more than just a story. It became a legacy, a testament to the transformative power of love, and a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life come when we least expect them, and that opening our hearts to others, despite the risks, is what makes us truly alive. In finding each other, Garrett and Grace had found themselves. In choosing to fight for their love, they had created something that would last far beyond their own lives. Their story was complete, their love immortalized not just in memory, but in the generations that followed, each one carrying a piece of that first moment when everything changed, when a lonely cowboy heard breathing in his hay wagon and made the choice to help rather than turn away. It was a choice that changed 2 lives, created a family, and proved that even in the hardest times in the wildest places, love could flourish and endure. Their happily ever after was not just an ending, but a beginning that continued long after they were gone, living on in every child that bore their name, every grandchild that heard their story, every generation that benefited from the love they had built and the example they had set. And that, more than anything, was the true measure of their love, not just that they had found each other and built a life together, but that their love had created ripples that spread far beyond themselves, touching lives and creating happiness for generations to come. From fear and desperation to love and prosperity, from loneliness and isolation to family and connection, their journey was complete, their story told, their love eternal. The lonely cowboy and the woman in his hay wagon had found what so many search for and few truly discover: a love that heals, a partnership that strengthens, and a bond that transcends even death itself. Theirs was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West but timeless in its truth, a reminder that real love conquers all, endures everything, and creates something beautiful that lasts forever.